If you've recently bought a few houseplants, here are my tips that I wish I knew before I'd started. Once you've understood these, you'll be able to enjoy the process of owning them a lot more. As well as, at some point by the end of this video, you should actually have some idea of what on earth bright indirect light means. So let's get straight into it. Humidity is a factor that most people neglect to look at. They might miss the houseplants, but this really has very little effect, because unless you are misting them every hour or so, it just doesn't elevate the temperature enough to make a significant difference. So you'll need a humidifier if you're looking to get some houseplants that require a higher level of humidity than what is inside your home. Heavy on the perlite. Just make sure that you water down your perlite. The dust that it gives off is really bad for your lungs, so just water it down a bit to keep that down, or wear a mask, or both. The drainage or water holding capabilities of media has nothing to do with rocks at the bottom of the pot, but the ready-made mixtures that you buy are generally pretty bad and they don't have anywhere near enough perlite in them. I have attempted to try and use an alternative to perlite, but I yet haven't had any success. Most plants need to get their nutrition from their media, but also it's about how quickly it can drain. The drainage is affected by the particulate size, which is why things like grit within your media will make it more sharply drained, and also its porosity. So something like perlite has got lots of little holes in it, so it can hold a little bit of more water than, say, grit can. Some plants can grow in an entirely mineral media, i.e. vermiculite or perlite or grit. So some plants, like lots of alpines, can actually use the minerals from the rocks that are in the soil, i.e. the grit, and be able to get some of their nutrition from that. But you just don't need to put so many rocks at the bottom of the pot. So definitely try making up your own media, because it can make a massive difference to your success. I think most of the pre-made medias are not what they make out to be, which is something that pacifies you and thinking that you're getting the right thing, but there's not really any standard to hold them by. It's pretty easy to make your own, so it's definitely worth giving it a go. And if we're talking about media and drainage capability of it, then we can talk about watering too. Overwatering is definitely a more common problem around people who've recently just got into houseplants, and actually overwatering does the same thing in most cases as underwatering, except that the roots remain intact from underwatering, so it's much easier to recover a underwatered plant than an overwatered one, because by the time the overwatered plant can't get nutrients through its roots, it's because its roots are rotten, so they'd have to entirely grow back. Plants are fairly well adapted to surviving through drought conditions, so almost all plants can go through a period of dormancy if they're getting unfavourable conditions like underwatering. So definitely underwater rather than overwater. It's very, very difficult to explain exactly how much each plant needs, and you'll have to look them up as you get each new plant of your own. That way it's manageable. But you'll definitely get a feel for which ones need which amounts. Some things to look out for with overwatering would be yellowing leaves when you know that you've been taking care of your plants and watering them. That would suggest you're probably overdoing it a little bit, so rein it in. It's probably the single most common problem that people have with when they say that they kill plants, they actually mean they just overwater them. And strictly speaking, you don't actively kill a plant most of the time, you just neglect it, or you're not quite sure what it needs. So maybe let's not use such murderous language about it. Remember that the idea of plants is that they give you pleasure, they exist for your benefit, and it's perfectly okay to have this selfish attitude because they're not sentient, so who cares? You know, if you killed one, or let's change the language, if one has died, don't then think that that means that you don't have this elusive green thumb, that you require something changing about you, or having something inherently different about you. It doesn't really matter, just try again, buy a different plant. Avoid getting expensive plants that you don't feel awful, that you've let them go. It feels okay if you've spent between £5 and £10 on a plant and you killed it. But if you don't feel confident, then don't go buying one of those outrageously expensive Monstera albos that cost like £3,000 or something like that, which admittedly is an unlikely situation for somebody who is recently getting into houseplants, unless you're incredibly rich, in which case please write to me. I've got some magic beans that I'd like you to buy. This is the one that really feels like magic, which is propagating. And you can find out for each plant how you can propagate it. On a Monstera like this, it's got these little aerial roots, and if you keep some of them intact and keep it to one node, which is where one leaf joins the stem, you can take a stem cutting. There are different ways of taking cuttings of different plants, but you definitely need to do it. You can just put them into water. They actually look quite nice on the shelf if you make one of these with some little test tubes in it. I've got a video on that if you want to see it. And then they'll fairly quickly root into that water, and now you can pot them up into your potting media that I've just shown you how to make. And you can get free plants. That's the best bit, and it's quite fun to see them all developing while you increase your stock for absolutely nada. Let's talk about support. You don't need to buy moss poles. There's nothing inherently special about them. You can make it out of whatever you've got around, a stick, canes, or here's a way of making a trellis that I did a TikTok about that I think you might find useful. You want deep fenestrations on your Monstera? And let's face it, who the hell doesn't? Then you need to create some sort of framework for it to grow up. I personally prefer a bamboo trellis over a moss pole because things that are straight in the ground tend to just tip straight back over when you put them up. So here's how to make a bamboo trellis from some canes and a little bit of twine. Put your cane up and leave a little bit of excess either side. Using a pair of secateurs, then twist the cane around in it to score a line. Scoring a line will leave you with a nice clean cut, rather than if you just try and go straight through it, you just splinter it. Then use a square lashing to tie the canes together. It's one of the easiest knots that I know, and it's the perfect one for this. It looks quite nice and it's really strong. Have a look in the comments and I'll do another video just on how to tie a square lashing if it's not clear to you from this. Wrap the two canes together, and when you've done enough of those, you start wrapping the knot back on itself to strangle it, which really pulls it tight. And this is better than a moss pole because the 2 points of contact in the soil mean double penetration for extra fenestration. So trust me on this, that this works. You can prevent a lot of pest and disease problems by just keeping good hygiene. You don't need anything special. This is just a spray bottle with some dish soap in it and a teaspoon of bleach. You can use this for your secateurs once you've cut a plant if you want to change to cutting another plant, and this will solve most of your problems. You don't need anything expensive. Just use what you've got around, clean the things off like you would with your hands, and you should be good. That's it for this one. So what the hell is bright indirect light? Well, I've got my phone up here and I'm just showing you about the brightness. So if you hold down on the screen, you can lock the autofocus and brightness. So then if you were to move around the room, so right now I'm right by a window, as I move away from the window, you can see how dramatically the light is diminishing in the room. Even though if you were in this room, you would be able to see me perfectly clearly, and I'll tap the screen again in a second and it'll adjust. So this is not a dark room, but I'm just quite far from the window, so that wouldn't be bright light. So now I'll just show you if I were to keep it locked on the exposure from the other part of the room and come back to the bright area, it's going to look massively overexposed. So you're getting a real feel for using your camera, which is like a photograph, photo being light. So it does give you a pretty good idea without having to buy a light meter, which will tell you in foot candles the actual light. Anyway, let's talk about what the direct light means. Direct would be, is there a direct line from the sun to your plant? But here I'm showing you that if I use a white surface, like the white walls of your house, it can bounce back. And that would be the indirect light. So I've got a small favour to ask, and that's if you've enjoyed the video, please hit the like button and share it in a WhatsApp group or your Facebook groups, however you want to share it, if you found it useful. Obviously, if you want to, then you can subscribe, but I appreciate that not that many people actually subscribe to channels, and I don't mind. You can come watch the videos. You don't need to be subscribed. You know that.